Food is arguably the most important resource in Age of Empires 2, but all we see in game is just a single set of numbers. Throughout this series, we will be diving in to see exactly what foods each civilization prepared and ate, and how well I can recreate them. This is Meals of Empires. The Chinese medieval period, for me at least, starts with the Tang dynasty, starting in 618. Then we have the Song dynasty following that. Then the Mongols arrive, we have the Yuan dynasty, and we're finishing off the medieval period with the Ming dynasty. Many of the ingredients that are found in modern Chinese cooking were already in China prior to the medieval period. So in the antiquity, in pre-antiquity, all of these resources are coming into China, or they're already native to China because China is such a big place. So for today's cuisine, we're going to be focusing on some of the foods and cooking techniques of the North and comparing that to what was found in the South. Today's recipes are going to be a Northern soup and a Southern stir fry, and I'm going to be trying out some dim sum as well. Let's get started with the cooking. I'll put this aside for now. We're going to be starting with the soup, and that will be a component of it, along with the aromatics of the shallots and the garlic and the ginger, is our Szechuan peppers. Instead of grinding this up like we will a little bit later, we're just going to leave it like this. We're going to let the oil take in all the flavors when we're starting our soup, and then take it out so that we're not crunching down on it. Szechuan pepper comes from the dried husks or peels of the fruit from the Xanthoxylum genus in the citrus family, which is the Rutaceae family. The spice creates a tingling and numbing feeling when eaten and can change the flavor of the other spices in the 5-spice blend. The compound is called hydroxy-alpha sensual. That gives the numbing effect. We're not using any green peppercorn in today's dishes. I would say chili just doesn't show up nearly as much in Chinese cooking as it does in the rest of East Asian cookings, at least in the modern sense. And I think part of that is just being further from those tropical areas that are growing the piper. So like the long pepper and the peppercorns are found on the Malabar coast, as we mentioned last week with the Dravidians. And then you have long pepper that's found more in the Malaysian, Indonesian archipelago. And that looks very similar to the modern Thai bird's eye chili. I was thinking a thumb of ginger more or less for each. Ginger would grow pretty well throughout most of China, both in the north and the south. There's quite a wide range of climates in China, so it can support, of course, quite a wide range of crops or ingredients. In the south, you have subtropics that are at the same latitude as Guadalajara in Mexico. And then in the north, maybe around Beijing or so, you're at a latitude similar to San Francisco. So if you can imagine one single empire going from Guadalajara up to San Francisco, that's like if you had two Aztec empires, a North Aztec Empire and a South Aztec Empire. You would think that the Mongols would also play into the cuisine that I'm making today, but they didn't really offer much. And that kind of goes to show the latitude that they were coming from the northwest, from plains that just have grass. The best you can offer is probably just some small herbaceous plant. All right, so we have the garlic. We pretty much have all the aromatics. I'm going to wash the bok choy. Bok choy is in the mustard family, Brassicaceae. It's a subspecies of Brassica rapa, which is what field mustard is. It has a slight mustard taste. It's not overpowering. It is very prone to getting dirt stuck in between the individual stems of the leaves, so I would suggest separating it and making sure it's nice and clean so you don't have any grit. So the bok choy also has a bit of a crunchy taste even once it's cooked. Another ingredient that we're going to be putting into the soup that does retain its crunch is these water chestnuts. Water chestnuts grow in aquatic or semi-aquatic environments, and this, what is the vegetable, so to speak, grows underground similar to an onion. It's a corm. It usually has a almost like purpley sheath around it, and that gets taken off before it usually gets shipped off to customers. The cell walls of the water chestnuts are reinforced so they don't break down as easily with cooking. I also don't find their lack of taste very interesting in soup, so I'm going to try to break them down until I'm not crunching down on tasteless ingredients. Chinese cabbages, or Napa cabbages as they're often referred to in the US, have a slightly more mustardy flavor than your typical cabbage, which I would say typical cabbage is pretty neutral in flavor. So similar to the bok choy, we're just going to cut up the cabbage in small little parts. The start of our soup will come with sauteing some of the aromatics we diced up, and I believe the main oil for the medieval Chinese would have been sesame oil. Soybean oil would have been available in the end of the medieval period, but at the start, sesame oil would have just been much simpler to use. And at the beginning of the medieval period, animal fats would have also been quite common. Our first trivia question is, which of these 5 spices in the 5-spice blend, which of these 5 would not have been from Asia? We have cinnamon, cloves, Szechuan pepper, fennel, and star anise. Janissary once again has the correct answer, and it is our fennel. Fennel is from the Mediterranean. We mentioned it when we did the Sicilians. That was the salad that had the fennel bulb right in the salad. We were just slicing it up and adding some orange to that. Fennel, though, was spread all over the world before the medieval period, so would be accessible to the Chinese during the medieval period. Szechuan pepper is from the Sichuan region in China. Cloves are from the Malaysian or Indonesian archipelago and were again spread by Polynesian navigators or traders. Our cinnamon would have actually been accessible in China itself. There is cassia cinnamon. We discussed the differences in cinnamon last week when we did the Dravidians. Star anise is not in the anise family at all. It's in the Schizandraceae family. Fennel and star anise have very similar flavors, but the fennel, I would say, is a much lighter flavor. It almost feels like it's diluting the overall spice blend. And then the star anise is like that strong licorice flavor from the anisole. That's the compound that gives that licorice flavor. And it's pretty sweet as well. So it's quite interesting on its own. I'm going to take the Szechuan peppers that I put aside earlier and drop them right into our soup. I just want the flavors to be mixed into our aromatics a little bit, and then I will take them out before we continue with the soup. While that's going, I can grind up the rest of these ingredients and mix them all together in our 5-spice blend. We have just about equal ratios of all of these spices, and they're going to end up in our stir fry a little bit later. Though I know Abby doesn't like licorice flavors that much, so I'm kind of curious to see how she's going to appreciate the flavors once they're all mixed together. So I'll add in my 2 leaves of cabbage as well as the 1 bok choy. The reason I'm making a soup for the north is because water was used more as a cooking medium in the north, whereas oil was a little bit more common in the south. Once the cities grew big enough, there was simply not enough cooking fuel to go around, so there was an incentive to cook the meals fast, and one of those fast ways of cooking was to use oil in a stir fry, because it was much simpler to transport something like sesame oil into the village rather than trying to transport a lot of charcoal or other sources of cooking fuel. The other main ingredient for our soup will be our shiitake mushrooms. Shiitake mushrooms are just very common because they're very easy to grow. They grow in a large number of places. They are saprotrophs, which means they grow on decaying matter. And in this case, for these guys, they decay on a wide variety of tree species, deciduous trees. I'm also going to give these guys a rinse as well, but I don't want to soak them too much because that can reduce their flavor. It can dilute their flavor. I'm worried that my taste buds are permanently affected for the next hour or so. So when Abby asked me if I taste anything, I'm just going to say yes, but I also had Szechuan peppers first, and so my entire mouth has had its taste buds altered. I've never had tofu this soft. This feels like silken tofu. This is kind of wild. All right, we'll call that good. They're cube-shaped, and they're roughly the same size that we were going with our other ingredients, like our mushrooms. You can get water chestnut powder. It's just much harder to find than simply water chestnuts. The idea behind it is that it has a lot of starch in it, which, similar to corn flour or wheat flour, it can be used to thicken soup. So yeah, chopping it in half and then using the butt of my knife to crush it down works pretty well. Here we have our oriental eggplant. As I mentioned in the previous episode when we did the khmer and we previously used it, I mentioned how it can easily be bruised, and you can see this guy on the outside is looking really beat up. For the stir fry, we kind of want to cut it in small enough pieces that it'll easily be able to fry up quickly. With green onions, you can actually cut this off and replant these bottoms because it usually comes with roots already attached and you'll see it resprout pretty quickly. Some people only use the whites of these green onions, but I like the greens as well. It provides a little bit more variety to the colors in the meal. Look at that gradient. That's very pleasing. Second trivia question. Which of these 4 inventions is not typically credited to the Chinese empires? The compass, the wheelbarrow, gunpowder, or rubber? Which of these is not typically credited to Chinese empires? The odd one out in this list is rubber. Rubber is produced from the milky latex of the rubber tree, Hevea brasiliensis, which is found in tropical Central America and the Amazon rainforest. It was the Olmec civilization that is credited as first using the rubber to make balls, and they had some sort of game involving balls, almost like, no, it wasn't lacrosse. It was some game where either if you lost it, I think you were killed. Very, very high stakes, much higher stakes than my cooking, thankfully. But what the Chinese did invent, along with the other tools that I mentioned, is the rudder, not rubber, rudder. Prior to traditional rudders that are mounted, people just used paddles in the water. You see some Egyptian hieroglyphics that have a rudder right behind the boat that's being held by someone. Oh yeah, so the wheelbarrow is credited to China as well. There's depictions of wheelbarrows in some tombs, and there's also a version that had one central wheel, and then people would be balancing on either side of it. It'd almost be like an ox cart that I guess put less weight on the ox because the fulcrum point, that wheel, was more in the center. And then gunpowder is famously attributed to the Chinese, but in Age of Empires 2, they don't get many gunpowder technologies. And then the compass, there's a metal spoon that's just floating in liquid, but the compass was pointing south. I forget exactly what the reasons behind that are. Dim sum is commonly seen in modern cultures as just small little portions of different Chinese foods, but originally it was a small portion that could be eaten along with tea when you went to a tea house. And this is more mid to late medieval period. So to make our rolled rice noodles, or our Cheung, we're going to start with 100 grams of rice flour. I have glutinous rice flour because I want to make sure that everything sticks together. In modern versions, they occasionally add extra starch, but I'm hoping there's enough starch already present in the rice. To this, I'm going to add about 350 milliliters of water. The way to make the rolled rice noodles is we lay it out on a flat surface, we steam it, and then we roll it up. I'm realizing I'm not going to have a great way of covering this afterwards to make sure all the steam stays in there. We're going to come back to that in about 4 minutes and see if my contraption has worked. For the cabbage leaves for the stir fry, I'm just going to cut them up very, very thinly because I want them to fry very quickly. While that's going, I can also just start our rice. We're just going with a very standard medium grain rice that I'm going to cook with a 2-to-1 ratio of water. And you can see there's a little bit of liquid moving around at the top there, but otherwise it's pretty solid. I'm just going to use a spatula and try to be very careful and try to roll it up. Yeah, but that's relatively a roll. I mean, it should be clear that it's relatively roll shaped. So it should taste like a rice noodle. I don't think we're getting to the temperatures we're supposed to be getting to. We're going to try with this next one that has a little bit more going for it and let it cook for a little bit longer. Third trivia question while we're waiting on the second Cheung to hopefully steam successfully. Does the English word cash, representing money, have an Asian etymology? Does the word cash come from Asia? Simple yes or no question, it would seem. Both of you guys say no, but here's the thing. Cash used to mean both a coin and just tangible currency versus like stocks. I guess stocks weren't quite in use by the medieval period. They came slightly after, once you had people trading commodities over long distances and you wanted to have a stock in what was being traded. Cash as a coin comes from the Tamil word kasu, which indicates a South Indian monetary unit. But Portuguese traders at the end of the medieval period wrote the word down as cas, C-A-S, which is nearly identical to the already in use Latin word for chest, which is capsa. So of course, the money chest is where you're keeping all of these coins. So these two words were kind of intermingled. I would consider this convergent evolution of two very similar words arriving into English from different sources and then continuing to evolve as our monetary systems develop. And I bring this up in the Chinese episode specifically because some of the first coin currencies were invented in China, and these were round coins that had a little square cutout in the middle. In modern times, they're often just seen as good luck, and they're used as necklaces since that form of money isn't necessarily used anymore, but they were called cash coins. Again, I said this is the most experimental version of the meal. It's not really ripping because it's so glutinous, so I have a bit more leeway with rolling this. So this is not too far off. Obviously, I'm not using a wok today. I'm using a stainless steel pan for our stir fry. Because I'm using an induction hub, I've convinced myself that a stainless steel pan will work a little bit better. Really, what you need for stir frying is just get all of the ingredients really hot very quickly, right underneath that smoke point of your oil. There's our cooled oil. Put in our aromatics. Oil is definitely smoking. Might set off the fire alarm, but as suspected. Next round. Smoking again a little bit, so that's a good sign. I guess the eggplant are very thirsty ingredients, so they feel like they just take up the oil very, very quickly. A common stir-fry technique is to shake the pan with one hand and just stir around the ingredients with the spatula. One great advantage of a wok is it's easier to flip ingredients while keeping the base of the wok on the heat. Oh, it's good for the eggplant. The device that was originally shaped like a wok was used to dry foods in the antiquity. But then when people decided they wanted to be able to actually dry foods faster over a fire, they needed something that would hold up a little bit better than ceramics. So that's where wet metal woks came from. I'm going to try to not take too much of the water. There go all of our spices. Just about there to burn. So now is the time to add in all of our ingredients back in. Crossing my fingers that will dissolve. I can smell the sweetness from the star anise. It's really interesting. It almost feels like I've added sugar in this process somewhere, but I haven't. It's just the sweetness from the star anise, a little bit from the Szechuan pepper. And now at the end here, we can add in our sauces. So I have some soy sauce. This is some Japanese soy sauce. It's a multi-month process to make soy sauce. You take your soybeans, you mix it with some wheat. You add in your bacterium, which is usually, your fungi, which is usually a koji variety. Back in the medieval period, they weren't too much in control of what was coming in to the mix. So there was probably some lactobacillus, which is usually used to ferment things like kimchi or sauerkraut. The main way they would be able to control what was being fermented over the multiple month period in their soy sauce was by controlling the salinity level. Last trivia question before we get to tasting our foods. Which of the following fruit would not have been available in winter in medieval China? We have persimmons, kumquats, kiwi, or jujubes. All of the fruits would be found in medieval China, but jujubes are in season earlier in the year from late summer to fall. Starting with the oriental persimmon, which is Diospyros kaki. There are also persimmon species that are actually native to southeastern United States and in Texas, two different species there. I would compare them to almost like a peach with slightly different flavors. The texture, though, is very peachy, but they are quite sweet and about peach size as well. Persimmons are harvested in fall to early winter. Then you have the kiwi. The kiwi was named by Australians to, I guess it was similar enough to the flightless bird that's found in Australia called the kiwi. I'm sure it has a different name in China. Kiwis were not actually cultivated as a crop in medieval China, but they were still collected wherever they grew. And then we have the kumquat. And so the kumquat is actually a member of the citrus family. I would say it's the smallest edible citrus, but as we saw as well with our Szechuan peppers, which are also in the citrus family, we do have smaller. And what's interesting about them is the juices can come out of the peel, and trying to figure out whether it's the peel that's sweet or the inner innards of the kumquat is like a little bit of a debate, and there are seeds in here, but you can otherwise eat it whole. And these, like most citrus species, come into season in the winter. And I would say that it tastes a bit like a tangerine, but it is quite nice that you don't have to peel it. You just throw it in your mouth, spit out the seeds, move on to the next one.
This is so cute.
You like this?
Yeah.
Okay, because when this came out, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to even be able to put this into the recipe. It's a bit of a mess.
Freaking adorable.
But I'm glad you like it. So we have our North Chinese soup, we have our South Chinese stir fry and rice. For dessert, we have what's not really a dessert, but it's an example of dim sum. We have our rolled rice noodles with a little bit of red bean paste and the kumquats that you tried earlier. Very often, the red bean paste is our red beans that are cooked down, sugar is added to it, and then they would be turned into a little bit of a sauce and put over rolled rice noodles. But it's very gelatinous, as you can tell, but it doesn't have like any flavor on its own. You kind of have to mix and match. So ideally, Colin would have put that as a sauce on top of it. In the soup, we have tofu, shiitake mushrooms, and some different greens. Abby is trying it at the moment. I know she's a little bit out of camera range, but she's really getting the full immersion of the soup.
Good. This is really good. This is really good.
Okay, I think we got it on camera. It is. Some of the greens are too stringy. That's a little bit stringy. Is this the reason you don't? Little? Is this the reason you don't like seaweed? Because of its stringiness.
Stringy, and also its taste.
You don't like the flavor.
Like the ocean and stuff.
Yes. So we have the eggplant. We have some cabbage, and then we have our 5-spice blend. I haven't had you tried a Szechuan pepper on its own yet, but I'm wondering if that face means you've encountered some.
I've encountered a rock. Flavor profile is excellent, but the texture of this, the consistency, the texture, it's all wrong.
Okay. I'm wondering if it's a spice that didn't get ground down enough.
Maybe. This is weird.
Yes. You already kind of poked at it and tasted it a little bit. Do you find there's potential for the red bean paste? I like
bean paste in general.
Execution score?
8.5.
8.5. Okay, so same as last week when we did the Dravidians. But last week we had a 4 on should you serve it to your girlfriend. I think this is going to go a little bit higher, but I'm not quite sure where it's exactly going to fall.
It's a lot better than I was expecting.
Based off my previous experience with stir fry.
Based on based on what I've seen from you, I'll give it an 8.
You'll give it an 8 on should you serve this to your girlfriend. You could see me fixing the errors I've made here and reserving it as a meal down the road. Sweet. This is, I would imagine, still fairly similar to what a peasant would be eating. Oh, one thing I didn't talk about was congee, and we'll come back to it with the Koreans. And somehow I'm going to have to find a way to make that appetizing. Next week will be a European civilization. Go ahead and subscribe and like, and I'll see you in the comments.